Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and one of the newest podcasts on the scene is Beyond Belief. Beyond Belief hails from the UK. Welcome to the show, Beyond Belief.
Thank you. It's really good to be here. I'm really excited to be meeting with you today.
So we'll cover later on in the program how you started your channel and what it's all about and who your audience is and stuff like that. But for now, we'll just get to know the, we'll say, 5 to 18-year-old Beyond Belief when Beyond Belief was a youth. So tell us your story.
What would you like to know, Gene? What would you like to know?
So, like, what some early recollections of church, maybe, and how you did things in the church as a youth, teenager. What were good things? What good experiences you had?
Yeah.
What things shaped you? And if something was not so good, you can mention that as well. Whatever.
It's a really interesting question, actually, Gene. Obviously, I grew up in the church. My parents were married, were still in the temple before I was born. I was born in the covenant. So my childhood, my youth, my adult years, the church has been everything I've known. All right.
What temple were they sealed in?
Oh, we're in the UK, and they were married in the 70s. It's a choice of one. It was the London Temple.
So London was built by then. Okay.
London was built in 52, I think, might be 56, but certainly in the 50s, and was built when my parents were married. So they were sealed in the London Temple, which, if you're not unaware, is not in London. Funnily enough, it's actually in a little village in the countryside, about 20 miles south of London, and it is actually a really, really beautiful location. The church bought a huge plot of land. They've got fields all around it. It is actually really lovely. But yeah, I grew up in the church over here in the UK, and it's been my background, my life, everything I've done. So in some ways, it's hard to say what was the experience like compared. What I can say is that my perception is that growing up in the church here in England is quite different to the experience that you might get over in the States, and significantly different, I would suggest, to growing up in Utah and the surrounding areas there. To give you a couple of examples, so I grew up family. My parents were married before I was born. They married youngish. My mum was 18. My dad was 21. When my mum and dad were married, they got to church the following Sunday. Bearing in mind my dad was 21, and have the state presidency sitting there at the time, or I think it might be the district presidency actually, sitting there waiting there at the time to interview him, because little did he know is they'd been waiting for him to get married to call him as the branch president. Okay, so at 21, my dad was serving as a branch president in a tiny little branch down on the south coast of England. And things like that, for those people that step up and take on those leadership responsibilities, wasn't unusual back then. You know, it wasn't unusual to find leaders that were the people who had the capability to lead, if you like, to taking on those roles and responsibilities. My dad served as branch president 5 times during my childhood and my youth. Okay, he served on the High Council, and he served on state callings and war callings. So and at the same time, my mum served in equivalent Relief Society president, Young Women's president, Young Women's presidency, state primary presidency, etc., etc. So my parents were, and I'm talking about that to illustrate that my parents were all in, were committed, and were hard workers, every people. Okay, I can relate to Nephi who says I Nephi haven't been born of goodly parents. My parents were flipping awesome. Yeah, but it's interesting when you grow up in areas like that. So my earliest memories really are growing up in a little branch in a little place called Hythe, which most people never heard of. It's in the New Forest down in the south of England. And my dad was called as the branch president. I think this was his third time as branch president when we were in Hythe. We had a branch of about 20 to 25 members that turned up on Sunday. Okay, we used to. I was probably about 5, 6 when we moved into that branch. We used to go to church on a Sunday, and we used to meet in what's known as a working men's club. It would be a bar, a place where the men would go in from the town, might go with their wives. They'd go and have a few beers on a Saturday night to celebrate the end of the week. And it was very much a club that the church was renting for our meetings. So we would have to go upstairs and clear away all the ashtrays off the tables and sweep up the floors before the meeting room was ready for us to hold church meetings. And that was the backdrop to my life as a young child in the church.
And
Again,
would the
there were
branch
wards around.
would the branch meet just once per day? They wouldn't have like a morning priesthood meeting and
It was, so we're talking, and again, I was 5, so I've got flash memories of that, and I couldn't tell you when the consolidated 3-hour block came in as opposed to the morning and afternoon. But the branch would have followed whatever if it was the 3-hour block, it would be the 3-hour block. If it was the morning and afternoon, it would be the morning and afternoon. Would have followed would have followed that. It's interesting. My wife, who I talked to, she also grew up a different part of the UK, up in the north in Yorkshire, and she talks of similar mirror experiences as a youth and as a child going to church in a similar kind of venue, clearing away and doing those kind of things. So my point is that's not unusual. Now it's not the same for every congregation, every ward. You had Southampton, not far up the road from us. It was the next ward along. Had a nice chapel that was built in the 60s, I think, by the members. You had other chapels around. So there were meeting houses there, but you also did have a lot of smaller units along the way. So yeah, my youth, in my early part of my youth, we're in the small branch. There were 2 youth.
does
One
that
was me.
mean there were 2? Yeah. So you would do junior Sunday school or whatever they would call it, primary, and it would just be you
Um,
and somebody else.
Primary. When I went through primary, there were probably about 10 kids or so
Okay.
in primary. So you did have primary classes, and the program was followed. In truth, even now, the ward which is local to myself, I would say that we have probably about 15, maybe 20 primary kids on a really, really good week. Um, so again, the scale is different. My understanding in Utah, over your side, a ward is 300, 300 to 400 people. If the church get 120 people out on a sacrament meeting here, they're looking to split the ward.
Right.
Yeah. If you've got an active, faithful attendance of 120, people are starting to say, does this need to become 2 wards? So it's very, very different. It's interesting when the church changed the policy on ward sizes a couple of years ago, it actually came more in line with the way they do it in the rest of the world rather than something completely new over in the States. Anyway, I digress. Your question was my experience growing up in the church. By the time I go into young men's, by the time I'm 12, there were 2 active youth in the time. One was myself, one was my older brother. Okay. I had younger brothers and sisters as well, but they weren't youth age. And we're in this small branch of 20, 25 people. So we didn't really have a young men's activity in midweek. Okay, bearing in mind we never did scouts here and Eagle Scout and all that kind of thing. It's a very American thing. Here we just had a young men's program where we did duty to God, and we were supposed to do faith promoting and enriching stuff, but we tended to play table tennis, a bit of basketball, and run around and hassle the young women. Is what we tended to do on Tuesday night, to be honest.
Did you do any
Um,
activities that would include traveling in your youth?
in what sense do you mean?
So, like, sometimes we would have a youth skating party and we would go to the roller rink or
Oh,
something.
if you had anything more than a branch or award activity, by the time I'm 14, we'd moved into a larger ward, so there was a larger youth group. So I'm talking younger childhood when it's very small.
Right.
But if you wanted anything more than just your ward, it always involved travelling. If you had a stake activity, and the church then was quite good at doing stake activities for youth, you would have to travel. We're in the New Forest. The stake activities would either be in Poole, which is down in Dorset, and that was 45 minutes to an hour's drive from where we lived, or you go across to Portsmouth, which was a similar kind of distance. So, as an absolute minimum for a stake activity to get to the stake centre, you're talking hours travel either way.
Wow.
Yeah. Um,
Would you ever
to be
do
able
like
to do
a
that.
ward football night where you would go to some local club and watch a soccer game? That I would say soccer.
No,
Because and I'm
that
only
kind
saying that because I live near the Oakland Athletics baseball team, and in
okay.
the summertime they would have discounted prices for Monday night, and sometimes our ward would do a special event going to a baseball game.
The church over here in the UK takes the concept of shared spending sacred funds carefully, very, very seriously. They are not going to release the funds to pay for those tickets. It
There
wouldn't
you go.
happen. Okay. It doesn't mean we didn't have great activities. We did some amazing stuff. We had water fights. I remember for a while I was in a ward down in Christchurch, down in Dorset, and the chapel has a hill out the back of it, which is like that. Okay, so you would have this wall, and there's this hill and slope going down. And in the summer, we used to turn up and we used to run bits of plastic down this hill, run hoses down it, and our Tuesday night activity would be diving headfirst down the hill. Um, so we did have a lot of fun along those routes. By the time I'm sort of 14, 15, we're probably talking being in congregations, wards that have maybe about 8 to 10 youth total. Across young men's and young women's. So there were other youth to get involved with. The church put on dances, on a monthly basis. I'm very jealous of those in the north of England. If we've got viewers coming in from the north who are of an age, if they come from the north, and I mention something like Huddersfield dance, any UK viewer who of an age, if I say Huddersfield dance, will know exactly what I'm talking about. People came from miles around for those apparently, but in the south, we didn't really have so much of that kind of thing. Um, we did have one regional convention in Oxford once. I got stuck in a lift at Oxford Chapel. Very exciting. Okay. So youth is what it was.
Oh yeah, and one thing I wanted
Sport.
to talk about was as you're a Mormon in school, and what was that like? You're like the
Oh
one
wow.
Mormon.
Okay. Now that's where I was going. Where I was looking to head anyway. Because of the church bit, it's hard to say how the experience compares to other people. It was small, and people got on very, very well. Now from school, the only members of the church in my school were myself and my older brother. The only members. And that was hard. That was really, really difficult. You grow up in the church faithfully, you're baptized, you're going to young men's, you're ordained a deacon, you're called as a deacon's quorum president, which I was, and I was a teacher's quorum president and assistant priest quorum. And you take this seriously. Okay. And one of the things I remember being told is if you're the president of a corps, in the same way you talk about bishops, if you're the bishop of a ward, then you're the bishop for everyone within in your ward, not just those that turn up at church on a Sunday. Now, when you
So
are
you're the
called
deacon's
as
quorum
the deacon's
president for
quorum
all the
president,
12 and 13-year-olds you know.
yeah, okay, all right, and none of them go to church. None of them have a clue what you're talking about. And you're taught in church about setting a good example. We in the church we talk about how to be a good missionary. Set an example of the way that you should live the gospel, and people want to know more. Now, when you're 12, and you're 13, and you're 14, and you're going to be the deacon's quorum president because you're the only deacon. Do you know what I mean? It's not that you're not winning that in any competition. You win. You get that calling because you're the only one.
It's not a
Yeah.
meritocracy. It's what is it called? It's not a requirement. It's because of
Yeah.
scant it's scarcity.
Yes. Absolutely. Scarcity. It is a really good way of putting it. But certainly the one you might have someone else who might be able to be a counsellor. You know, but it puts a lot of pressure and responsibility. on people. And you grow up in the church and you go to church, to school, and the world is different to the world of church. And again, it's something my wife and I have reflected on a lot, and we've talked about quite a bit. Um, do you live the same life at school as you do at church? You know, um, is school a difficult place? I found school very difficult. I was bullied quite a bit. I think I probably was different enough, if you like, to attract that kind of attention. Unfortunately, and
Would you
that's
get
because
bullied?
I'm a bit quirky. That's a bit quirky because I'm a bit quirky rather than from a faith point of view. Um,
Would you get bullied as a
but
Mormon?
yeah, of course, of course. I think I think it's hard to say where the line comes because I was bullied anyway, and with church or not, I probably would have been bullied anyway. Is the truth. But yeah, being a member of the church is something that makes you different. And I do remember being at school with people are saying, kids around you saying, "What on earth are you on about? What do you believe?" And trying to explain to people who this guy called Joseph Smith was, you know, and with all sincerity, trying to communicate across as a young teenager, particularly, without necessarily the tools and the ability to really be able to explain that effectively with an audience that perhaps haven't yet the listening and empathy skills to be able to take on what you're saying. Um, and it was hard, and you double down on this. And, people would talk about, why don't you drink Coke? Because in those days, my family were non-Coke drinking Mormons. The day that changed was a great celebration in my life. I was probably about 12 or 13 when that changed. But I grew up the first part of my life not drinking Coke. Why don't you drink Coke? And you're trying to explain this to people when to young people who really are not comprehending or getting it and are just seeing something that they perceive as a bit odd. But for you, it's normal. This is what God's asked you to do. This is how it is. And why can't you see this? Why can't I explain this? So when you're at school, everyone you meet is coming from a different position. The other thing it does actually, and this is one of the things that I've reflected on a lot, is it perhaps changes how church is in itself in the UK. Yeah. And what do I mean by that? And I watch a lot of social media. I follow what's going on in the news a lot at the moment. And I'm well aware of, and this isn't without a positive or a negative spin on the political situation in the United States at the moment, but it is interesting to watch. Okay. And one of the things I've learned over the years is how right wing the church is generally. All right. And I was unaware of that. And that is because in the UK, being conservative is something different to being conservative in the States. So, whilst it would be probably fair to say that the majority of members sit on that conservative side of the spectrum here, that is very, very different politically and attitude wise to the way it is in the United States.
Can you give us a couple
And
of examples of like a policy or a way of treating people that would be different from conservatives in the UK and conservatives in America?
within the church or just in general?
Just in general, just the political
Okay,
scene.
so issues such as abortion are very much a settled issue here. Okay, it wouldn't even if someone actually suggested this was something to fight an election over, you would see eyebrows raised from every corner of the spectrum.
And
Okay, it
is
just is a settled issue.
the landscape on that it's the women's body and it's their choice?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that's been a settled issue here for probably 20, 30 years.
Just like no one
Yeah,
would come to your door with a gun and say you have to donate your kidney to your
no,
neighbor
you're joking, aren't you?
to keep your neighbor alive. The same thing should be with women. If they don't want to donate their body for some other life form, they don't have to.
Individual people. individual people will have an opinion on these things, and
Right.
the church sits on that right, and sits and has policy that is not pro-abortion. So within the church, the church members wouldn't be pro-abortion, okay, as such, but politically it's a settled issue.
Right. And would
It
the
just
same thing be said for LGBTQ? They're just normal people trying to live their life, and they're not
pretty
somebody
much.
to be an enemy.
I think there is debate about trans issues at the moment, but I
Right.
would say they're not as strong as stateside. But again, individual members would have their own take on LGBT issues. But politically, it's a settled issue. Indeed, we had an election 3 or 4 years ago, and one of the candidates in Scotland was no, it was the leader of the Liberal Democrats. One of the minor parties that was fighting the election in England is a devout Christian. Okay, and he was challenged on his views about LGBTQ and same-sex marriage, and he went as far as to say, um, I have my own personal opinions, but the party line is different to that, and I will support the party line because this is my own religious perspective. It's not, the settled norm in this country, and because he was prepared to say that my own opinion might be slightly different, he very quickly had to step down from as leader of that party. Okay, just to give you an example of how these things work out. So it's very, 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 very different from over in the States. And how does that look in a church context? Well, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I turned 18 in 1993. So we are talking Kimball, Benson. All right. Um, if you ask me about Benson and what kind of things Benson taught, and if you ask most UK members, Book of Mormon, read the Book of Mormon, place the Book of Mormon, Pride. Okay, the Benson-esque talks, until recently, as I started to dig into understanding church history, I had no idea the political affiliations that Benson had, none whatsoever. That he was affiliated with Skousen and
The
I can't
John
remember the
Birch
name of the organ.
Society.
Yeah, that's the Birch Society. That he was as racist as they come. All right, that he was, and have looked at the quotes and understanding that. If you've not read 20 for oh, what's the book? John Glynn did a great stories on it. The Second Class Saints.
Second class
Second
saints.
Class Saints. If you've not read that, it's definitely worth reading. But that side of the church that shapes the political landscape in America kind of skips past us here. And it's not to say that, like I said, the church does sit towards the right, but it's not the same. I spend a lot of time on social media, and it's social media perhaps, and it's some of the things I've seen that made me just decide to start podcasting. We'll talk about that a little bit. And I watch some of the stuff that comes out on Twitter, or X as it is now, particularly. And I've spent a long time thinking, I really hope that what I'm reading here is not representative of the church as a whole, because it is grotesque. It's not just, I'm going to defend my faith. It is absolutely grotesque, the kind of things that people are saying and are publicly willing to say, professing to be members of the church, that espouse hate and anger towards communities they don't understand and they don't appreciate, and they're not part of. I was just looking last night, there was a piece on someone who was posting about trans issues and was commenting on an interview with Laurie Lee Hall. And the post that was there, the person was like, utter vitriol and personalized hate towards Laurie Lee. And I was like, hang on, you may not agree with being trans. I think you're wrong, but you're allowed to have your own opinion. But I was grew up in a church which kind of parents and people that were influenced by a church of a background that they came from. You know, I went to a school that was a lot of the village schools here are what we call Church of England schools, and they even are now. And the Church of England has a vested interest in them and those kind of things. And you go to school on a daily basis, you have assembly, you sing Kumbaya, and you'd sing, um, I'm trying to be like Jesus. Jesus said, love everyone. And I danced in the morning the world was begun. And you would say grace before you went for school dinner. You know, a level of gobble gobble, munch munch. Thank you, Lord, for our lunch was literally a prayer we used to say in primary school. You know, my parents had grown up in the Church of England. I grew up with knowing the stories of Jesus and knowing the stories of the Old Testament. You know, and that was part of my backdrop through school, through education, through my parents, and those kind of things. And I really, really grew up believing that Jesus said, "Love everyone and to treat them kindly too," and that when your heart is filled with love, others will love you. You know, or I'm trying to be like Jesus. I'm following his ways, and you know the rest of the song. And that is the gospel that I grew up with. Yeah, um, is showing love to those people around you. And one of the things that I found really sad as I've matured, as I've looked at this a little bit closer, is as a church, we don't show love to everyone. We pretend we do. We make up excuses as to why being hateful is actually showing love, but we do not show love to everyone. And that is the Jesus that actually I grew up to know, despite the fact I grew up in the church.
That's right. It's almost like there's two Jesuses, right? There's the one Jesus that says, do exactly what I say, like get baptized and things like that. And people maybe who are conservative in America and American Mormon churches think that then everything needs to be exact, like taking the sacrament with the right hand, you know, and we'll
Yeah.
say some apostles who say that you have to stand up or sit down based on whether I'm standing or sitting. And
I want to be there when he does that, just to be belligerent and not do that to see what
there you
happens.
go.
Because what are
And,
they actually going to do? Um,
and so there's what probably the people who are in social media who are commenting the way they are not probably aware that their comments are detrimental to the faith of some people outside the United States.
yeah, absolutely. I imagine the detrimental faith of some people inside the United States as well. To be
Right.
honest, they make themselves look absolutely stupid. But it's you know, even where I am on my faith journey now, I don't hold vitriol or hatred towards the church. I really don't. You know, the church has done many, many good things for me in my life. And I'm the first to admit and recognise and praise that. But they are damaging the church is interested in its reputation right through top to bottom. You know, we see what happened with Nemo because the church protecting its reputation. We see what happened to John DeLynn because the church protecting its reputation, etc., etc. As soon as something happens that could damage its reputation, the church will take action. As soon as there is something that comes up, the church will damage the church's reputation. They will take a page out of Joseph Smith's diary because it's a different version of the first vision and put it away in a safe until someone says, "Hang on a minute, there's a page missing here. Can we go back, please?" And even the prophet of the church will say, "Yeah, you're right. I'll go and get it." You know,
It's sad that
the church will.
we've been in the day where lying for the Lord gives you prominence in the church, and telling the truth makes you
Yeah,
excommunicated.
absolutely, absolutely, because it's about the church's sanitized, correlated image. And what is ironic is these people who are behaving this way are damaging the church's correlated image because the church has moved, particularly over the last few years, its curriculum, and this one of the things I'm exploring on my podcast, has changed. If we go back for 8
Right.
years and pull the previous iterations of the Doctrine and Covenants manuals, they're actually quite fire and brimstone. They're actually quite end of days and very specific in the things that we taught. It's back to being in that McConkie, Benson, Kimball era where I was a youth and a teenager. Now,
So
actually,
you were told as a youth
go
that
on.
you were part of the chosen generation to usher in the Savior.
Of course I was. Every generation's told that. And our kids will tell their kids that as well, you know. But of course, we were told we were part of a chosen generation to usher in the second coming of the Saviour. I remember when I was in youth lessons, the lessons would be very, very focused around. We'd have a lot of lessons about signs of the times. We would learn the signs of the times, what's going to happen in the last days. We all knew that there would be two apostles that would go walking through the streets of Jerusalem and would die. And that would be a sign of the Saviour coming. We all knew that the moon would turn to blood and etc., 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 because that's what was taught. And I imagine the same things were taught in the States because they all come from the same correlated. So I'm
That's
not
right.
suggesting there's anything special about that. But this is all underpinned with McConkie Mormon doctrine. This is underpinned with, and we're getting the tail edge of it, whereas you guys probably would have got more of the Benson-esque American exceptionalism. The state, we hate communism. America's great. We defend the Constitution, and that's what I perceive is the messaging. And I'm happy if you tell me I'm wrong. That's what I perceive that some of that messaging was at that time. American exceptionalism doesn't work outside of America. So we would have kind of, when you start the Doctrine and Covenants year, we would have talked about how America as a land was prepared for Joseph Smith to be able to be able to receive those revelations and restore the gospel, and America needed to be where it was for that to happen. But that's kind of where it ends,
Right.
and
Well, I
then it
guess
just gets on with the story.
you could say, but it was the British skilled workers that helped build the Salt Lake Temple, and it was the British young women who became the brides and the mothers of thousands and tens of thousands of Utah Mormons eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all intertwined, and I think that as we live in a global church, and I think the church is actually, to be fair, is doing a lot better as a global church now of adjusting its messaging and the way it talks to be to not alienate the world as a whole, to actually consider a curriculum that is correlated that works in the UK as well as it does in the United States. It'd be interesting sometimes when I was younger, when you would look at youth programs, young women programs, we're going to do this, we're going to have these callings and these people here. And you sit there in a ward and you go, who's going to do this? Because you have, in a big ward, you've got an active membership of 120.
So
Yeah.
you're
A
noticing a
core membership
softening.
of,
You're noticing a
oh,
softening
totally.
of the message, and that what leads to your podcast. But we'll go back to your decision to go on a mission or not.
Oh, I didn't go on a mission. I
There
didn't
you
go
go.
on a mission. Yeah. And that wasn't because I had to, it was never an active decision not to serve, to be fair. As a youth, as a teenager, I was all in, I was all committed, I would do whatever was asked of me. We lived in a small branch. We had two elders. I was supposed to be about 13. We had two elders in the branch, and one of them got really, really, really ill, and they couldn't go out. And I got this, and my dad was he was either state mission president or the branch president at the time, one or the other. He got a phone call asking, "Can you help?" And what he did was volunteer me. And so, because at that time the missionaries lived with an elderly member, an elderly brother, effectively what we were able to do was splits. And one of the missionaries stayed at home, and the member that was there stayed at home with him, so he had a companion. And I, as a 13-year-old youth, spent a few days with the other missionary, going out so that he could carry on doing what he was doing. Loved it, absolutely loved it. And I would spend during the perhaps early to mid part of my teenage years, if I was given an opportunity to go out with the missionaries, I would do so. There wasn't any desire not to serve a mission, is my point. But what there was my age. And my birthday, I was born in July. All right. And when you look at and I'm not quite sure how it works over on your side, but at the time, obviously, missionaries go off at 19. So I finished what we call college here, equivalent to finishing your high school over there. All right. I finished my A levels, as they're called, when I was 18. And I then couldn't go on a mission for 12 months because I had a whole year to wait till I was 19. Or, and I wanted to go to university as well. So it meant I was going to have 3 years before I go to university. It's not like in Utah, where if you turn up to BYU, they know that you're going to be there for a year and you're going to go off on your mission, and they factor that into the equation. It's actually quite hard to turn around to a university in the UK and say, I'm going to come for a year, then I'm going to take a 2-year absence and come back. They'll look at you and go, no, you're really not.
Going to university is a commitment.
Yes, exactly. And so if I wanted to go to university badly, and that would have meant 3 years before I could actually do that. And so what I decided to do was to go to university. I would have graduated. University here is 3 years normally. So I would have gone to university 18. I'd be graduating 21, 22 latest. And then my plan was to serve as an older missionary. Okay. So that was the rationale. It wasn't I don't want to serve a mission decision. It was a time and motion study, I guess, to make sure I could achieve everything I wanted to do. However, I went to university in Aberdeen, which is the furthest away in the UK from home you could go. All right. I grew up on the south coast of England. I went to university in the northeast of Scotland.
Was that the luck of the
Loved it.
draw, or did you have a choice to do that?
A bit of both, to be honest. You apply for university. There's a prescribed method of applying to university, and if you don't have a university place, there's a system they call clearing over here, which basically means there's a bun fight for any university place hasn't been filled. When your exam results come out in August, you can then you pick up the phone to the university. You've got any places? I've got these grades. Can I come? And I use that clearing system to get into Aberdeen. Travel up to the northeast of Scotland. Had a wonderful 4 years up in Scotland. All right, amazing place, amazing people, lovely ward. Made lots of good friends. But one of the people I met was the person that was going to become my first wife.
And so
Fell in love.
do they have something like Institute near the colleges
Yeah.
or young adult programs?
Yes. Okay. But you've got to bear in mind the numbers. All right. So by that time I'm in Aberdeen, the Aberdeen stake, and this is geographically isn't going to mean much unless you know the geography of Scotland. It includes 2 wards in the city of Aberdeen, up in the northeast of Scotland. All right. The next closest ward is a place called Peterhead, and Peterhead is 50 miles north. Okay. You then have the Inverness ward, which is 100 miles away. Yeah. You then have there was Elgin, which is 75 miles away. There was, and you get the idea. Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of institute program, we did have an institute program running. It was run from the State Centre, which was the other chapter mine. There were about 5 YSA from my ward, but maybe about the same from the others. So we had about 10 of us that would. And to me, that's a really big. I don't know what that's like over how that fits and how that tracks where you guys are, but to me, 10 seemed like a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, 10
There would
10 at Institute would encompass maybe about an area that's like 10 miles north and south and 10 miles east and west.
Well, that's smaller than my ward's boundary as well.
Yeah,
You
there
know,
you go.
yeah. So yeah, so there am I in Scotland, small ward. It was great. You got to know each other, and you were friends, and those kind of things. There were, although I ironically only ever went to one dance. You might have regional dances. Regional dances all of Scotland. At that instance, so you would have a regional dance. You might travel to Edinburgh. You might travel to Dundee. You might travel to Glasgow. You're talking 150 miles each way by the time you get talking some of these places. You know.
And so what were the events that led to meeting your wife?
Absolutely nothing to do with those at all. I was a student at the university. My wife's father was a mature student. They came from Bradford. He'd applied to go to university. He was studying theology at the university, and his family moved with him. So his daughter moved into our ward because her dad was a mature student at the same university that I was. Yeah. And, we met, we were young, we were probably too young, fell in love, and we got married, and we had our first daughter, and not necessarily in that order, which is one of the reasons precluded me from serving mission, you know.
Wow.
Um, but that was how it was at the time. So
Yeah. And
yeah, so
so,
that's how we met. Anyway,
and
go on.
what was your, did you stay in school? Did you graduate?
No. There's the other irony is I had a wonderful time in Scotland. Um, but maybe that if you're going to go to university, I can say this with maybe 3 or 4 years hindsight. I'm a little older than 21 now. You can be honest about your attitude at the time. If you're going to succeed at university, you've got to attend all your lectures. You've got to hand the work in, and you've got to be able, and you've got to do that. And perhaps university wasn't the right place for me, not from ability wise, but just the way I learn, the way I do things. I actually work in apprenticeships over here, and I teach kids who are coming through technical skills to a similar level to you would get through university, but through an apprenticeship and employed route.
So learning while
And I
doing.
would, yeah, exactly. And as I reflect back, I wish the kinds of programs that I teach were available when I was a teenager, because it's not about ability, it's about what way I learn and the way I access learning. I needed something like that. And
All right.
when I was at university, away from home, I perhaps didn't do everything I should have done. And that's on me. I'm not, but by the time I've met my first wife, my daughter's on the way, it was very easy then perhaps to say, I've got a family, I've got to go and deal with this, and therefore I'm not going to finish what I was doing. You
And
know,
so you had to pick a career to start working, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely,
And what'd you pick?
absolutely. So at the time, I was studying molecular biology at university. Obviously, I didn't finish. I at the time, I just baby, I was young. My wife was even younger. I had to put food on the table, and so I worked in fast food. Initially I worked for um, I worked for a busy restaurant. It's the one where they give you crowns and flags, and you buy Whoppers and things like
Burger
that there.
King. Yeah.
That's the one. Okay. Later on, we moved closer to my parents for that support, and the church support was fantastic when we did that as well. And I worked at the one with the big yellow M outside as well. So you do what you need to do to provide for your family. Um, and then obviously, if we look at it from a gospel lens and a church lens as well, we are trying very hard to fulfill callings and serve in the church and doing those kind of things. Later on, I discover my love or rediscover my love of IT, of technology. I move into working into the IT sector. I move into training within the IT training, and then I move into apprenticeships, which is where I am now. But all of that, we're working very hard to, from that church lens as well, that takes up your life very, very heavily in terms of callings and things like that.
And so do you have an empty nest now or
So, so just a quick story. So obviously, we're talking about my first wife. After about 7 years, I'd started to move into IT. And things were taking a toll. We married young, really young. And one of the things you're not going to find me doing here is knocking my first wife. Okay. She's a good person. But I was young, she was younger, and she grew up alongside me, is the truth. And as she grew up and matured herself in a way that I never really understood until I experienced it, she wanted different things. And that marriage ended. One of the most difficult moments of that was about a year before the marriage ended. She talked to me about a few things going on in our personal life, and she'd also expressed that she no longer wanted to go to church.
right?
Um,
So you initially married civilly. Did you end up getting sealed?
yeah, Yeah,
Okay.
no, we were sealed in the temple. We were sealed in the London temple in about 98 or 99.
So you were
Um,
doing the things for the celestial family. You were thinking of the future,
oh, absolutely.
the mansions
Absolutely.
in heaven.
Yeah, was sealed in the temple, serving diligently in the callings that we were given. So I'd served nothing too exciting. I was a Sunday school president for a while. I taught in primary. I was the elders' quorum president. We then moved up into to the Midlands in England and we moved into a small branch back to my membership of 20. I now experience this as an adult. I was the elders quorum president within that branch for quite a long time. My wife was serving in my first wife was serving in primary. I was trying to be diligent, and when you're in a small branch, there's a lot of work that goes on, and it had a toll on my family. And one of the things that actually was one of the break points, and I'm not looking to put blame in any one direction. There's so many parts of the story that I'm not going to today that her fault, my fault, whatever it might be. It doesn't really matter. But one of the things that was break point was actually the amount of time that I was spending home teaching, meetings, serving, fulfilling my callings, and trying to do what we'd always talked about
You were
doing
married more
as
to
a
the
child.
church than your spouse in a way.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, but yeah, what really coined it for me at that point was going to church with my children, but without my first wife. And that first week that I did that, the branch sung "Families Can Be Together Forever" in Sacrament. That was painful. That was a really, really painful day. And I struggled for a while after that. And then the marriage did end, and I was actually less active for about 7 years, not based around a faith crisis, but based around that experience,
Shame.
a painful divorce. Yeah, but actually no. It was more about an experience there that left me. And I think what I said to myself, if um, I'm trying to do, if God is looking after me, He's got a funny way of showing it. It's probably the best way of putting it. I think I had a lot of finger pointed towards God at the time, towards my Heavenly Father about what was going on. And,
Like for all the support you were
and
giving him in the church, he wasn't helping. He wasn't pulling his weight.
very, very much so. Very much so. Certainly is how I felt. But I stopped going to church at the time, and like I said, it wasn't about testimony. It was about just how I was dealing with that experience. Indeed, there were occasions where I'd actually almost introduce people to the missionaries as a less active member because
Right.
I could see where they were going with, and it's hard to describe. So, but that was my background. That was my experience. I lived a pretty ordinary life, I would suggest, outside the church. I did some things from a church point of view I shouldn't do. I'm not going to suggest I was a good boy. Wasn't a particularly bad boy either. I didn't live the gospel. I didn't
You
live.
didn't become a prostitute.
No, no. I did have girlfriends and a couple of long-term relationships. You know, as you do, but I wasn't out whoring and out every night and chasing the women and stuff like that. I did drink a little, not a lot, but I did drink a bit and didn't live the word of wisdom and those
You
kind of
weren't the
things.
prodigal son,
Um,
but you might have known him.
yeah, that's the one. That's the one. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I was less active for about 7 years. Um, and then there were a couple of things that happened. So how the church talks about be, and I've mentioned it earlier, be a good example and people will see that. I was at work one day and I was chewing the fat with one of my colleagues, and he mentioned that one of the people that was a senior manager of my business was one of those Mormons, wasn't he? All right, now this person was someone I looked up to and respected. All right, and I kind of get the be the example because people want to know more, because it did have that impact on me. Yeah. And that, if you like, was the catalyst for me dipping my toe in the water, starting to come back and becoming active again. Yeah, that went on over a period of a few months with me soul searching, praying, not getting answers to prayer, not not finding what I wanted to do. I was disfellowshipped as a member at the time. I'd been through, when I first came back to church, they were like, "Well, we're going to need to talk to you," and I was disfellowshipped. It's fine, it's the process that goes through. But I wasn't seeking an end to that disfellowshipment as much as seeking to actually be sure that I was wanting to go back, if that makes any sense. And I'd actually set myself a deadline date that I was going to work to. Um, and one of my close friends, who was a member of the bishopric, who I'm pretty darn sure will be watching this broadcast when it goes out. Hi, you know exactly who you are. All right, came bouncing into the bishop's office, out from the bishop's office, down the corridor one day, dragged me into the library. Got some amazing news for you. Got this envelope in my hand. It's an invitation to a reconvene of a disciplinary to review my membership with a view to restoring my blessings, if you like. Yeah. Um, and I remember going away from that meeting thinking, it's all very well you feeling this is a great idea, but I'm not sure I'm ready yet. But I attended that, and I actually voiced that to the bishop we had at the time. And the bishop said to me, "You might not think you're ready, but we think you are, so deal with it." All right. So I went home and started living the word of wisdom. you know,
There you go.
it is the truth.
They needed more
Very quick.
priesthood leadership to fulfill callings, maybe.
Quite possibly. You got to bear in mind, my family are all in the ward at the time as well, and are well known. I was well known before I went less active, and I'm also one of those. It can sound arrogant to say it, well-loved members that people were quite eager to see, if that makes any sense. Um,
Were you
along the
like
way,
the
and of
friendly
course,
uncle to everybody?
yeah, something like that. I think more the person that actually will say yes, and when things need doing, will actually do it. From a family that do that as well, and so there's a perception that beyond belief is exactly the guy that you want in the war, because he's someone, if he's ill, and he's going to really help. Now, at the same time, and my wife's story is her story. I'm not going to talk about her story very much at all, but she had also been less active. I'd never met her. We didn't know each other at the time, over a similar period of time. And she also had come back to church about the same time as that. We both joined at about the same time a Facebook group for single adults, um, not as a dating kind of group, but just as a support kind of network. We met through there, fell in love, did it again, see the fall in love thing, you see, and very quickly we married. And that's when I moved to York, and York's where I am now.
Was that
And
about
I
15
am
years ago?
it's our 13th wedding anniversary at the end of this month. Okay. Um,
Congratulations.
so, 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 so that was 13 years ago. I'm still not quite sure how I convinced this amazing woman to marry me. I managed it somehow. I'm not letting go, you know. Um, Absolutely fantastic. And she has two sons who are also amazing and have blessed my life alongside the kids that I've had. Um, Already. We have a daughter together who is 7. So we've got adult kids, we've got a 7-year-old, we've got grandkids, and we have a wonderful relationship and life together. And she is flipping awesome. Um,
So
what is
are you at
interesting?
this time, are you
Well,
redoubling your effort to be a good Mormon again and doing all the
we
things?
were, we were okay. So obviously, I move up. I move into the ward where we are now. And over, if we look over from about 2012 when I got married up to COVID. Okay, over that period of time, I served as, and I say this to show how busy we were, not because I'm anyone special. I served as elders quorum presidency councillor, elders quorum president, Sunday school president, assistant state clerk, high council, Sunday school president, and the best calling ever. I could be tempted to go to church if someone offered me this calling again. I hope my bishop isn't listening as a result, but I was the primary music leader. If you want the top dollar calling, you want to be the primary music leader. It is flipping awesome. It is the best calling out there. Okay. But over that 10-year period, I served in all those responsibilities and I took it seriously. And it wasn't just me. Okay. My wife served as councillor on young women's, young women's president, councillor on primary president, state young women's, state primary, but some seminary teacher teaching early morning seminary whilst pregnant and with a young baby. And bear in mind, if you're doing seminary here, it isn't part of your school day. All right. Early morning seminary is at the chapel at 6:30 in the morning. So you can go to seminary and go home, get into school uniform and go to school. So my beautiful wife was 8 months pregnant, driving 25 minutes to the chapel to be there for 6:30 in the morning to teach half a dozen youth a seminary lesson before coming home and doing her day. All right. She did it willingly and gladly because that's what you do when you serve in the church. You serve willingly, you serve gladly. And again, what's my point in sharing this is we both worked really, really, really hard. We both were all in, committed members of our ward, of our stake, and committed most importantly to Jesus, to the Saviour, and to what we were trying to achieve. And then COVID comes along. And COVID comes along, and I'm pretty sure it's the same over there as here. Everything kind of stops. And you get a chance to sit back and reflect. We had a son who was serving a mission at the time. He was serving in the Kenya Nairobi mission. He'd been there for 7 months. He speaks fluent Swahili. It's flipping hilarious when he speaks in Swahili, but he is fluent in Swahili. He spent 7 months in the north of Tanzania, on the edge of Lake Victoria, in a little town called Mwanza. And if you're in the Kenya Nairobi mission in somewhere like Mwanza, you're not your nearest next board, next companionship is a couple hundred miles away. He used to have to fly to Zone Conference once a month. They would put them on a plane, fly them across Tanzania from one side to the other to Dar es Salaam for Zone Conference. He was never in a district. He's really proud of the fact he's never once attended a district meeting while he was on his mission.
Wow.
Okay, because there wasn't a district for a meeting to attend. He and his companion were in a little town doing their thing very independently. He worked really hard for 7 months and served really, really hard on his mission. COVID hits, and within 48 hours, he is dragged out of the mission field, out of the Kenyan bush where he was at the time, brought back to the mission home on a plane, being sent home. Okay, it was the right thing to do, but he was devastated because he wanted to be in Kenya. That's where the Lord had sent, where God had sent him. And he came home and he got redeployed elsewhere within the UK after being messed around for a few months. And he was sitting in a flat with 2 elders that were basically treating him quite obnoxiously because he was put into a 3-man team. The team, who obviously were friends, got on together, and their experience of a mission in England was very, very different to what he'd experienced in terms of behaviours, attitudes, how you do things, and sitting there doing social media. And it was a difficult time.
Was it about he had 6 months to go on his mission when COVID happened?
He was in the field for 7 months, and then he came home.
Wow, so he had learned after only 7 months Swahili?
Yeah. Now, and here's the added thing. Okay, if we use the church's definition of the gift of tongues as opposed to what the gift of tongues was when Joseph was alive, all right, and about learning a language while on your mission, Kenya Nairobi is an English-speaking mission. Officially, the national English is a spoken language there. There is no language training. So he goes to the MTC, does a week of home MTC, 2 weeks in Johannesburg, flies him up to Kenya. Oh, we're sending you somewhere really remote where they all these speak Swahili. So he had to learn the language on the fly, on the go, and he did it. It's very impressive, actually.
That is impressive. So
Yeah.
he had another year and a half almost in England to serve. Did he make
He
it?
served, no, he served about a month and a half, 2 months. They kept them. When they came home, the state presidency didn't know what to do with them, and so they partnered them up with a companion within the state who had also been sent home, and they were sort of met online every day and kind of didn't do very much because they were missionaries, but were expected to be missionaries still. Um, Over the states, it really hurt him actually because all his companions that went back stateside, they all got released and be told they would be recalled. Yeah, consistency in the church doesn't exist at times because in this country, the local leadership decided that they should stay serving as missionaries until they could redeploy them, and then they desperately, rather than send them back to where they were before, they tried to redeploy them around missions in the UK, and it was difficult. And he wasn't the only youngster that came back that had the same problem.
And I suppose if you're a social media missionary and you still want to learn everything you can about the church, you might type in Mormon studies or something like that in a Google search and learn more things than you ever thought you'd ever learn.
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, he started this journey before we did. And he wasn't really a massive influence on us, but when he came home and he was released, he spent a lot of time studying and reading and researching, and he made his own decisions. But that's him. I want to come away from him because, like I
Sure.
said, I've talked a lot about him without asking his permission first. So I want to leave him where he is. Um, in terms of our story, though, COVID finishes, we go back to church, and I'm now the primary music leader. And I'm starting to reflect on a few things. For me, there's a few things about me. I've always been fairly nuanced in my belief in terms of what I understand and what I don't, and how I perceive things.
It's like it doesn't
Um,
matter if there's not a real flood. It doesn't matter if any facts in the Bible
More
have.
than that, it became at 18, that became a big issue for me. See, I went to university, I studied genetics and molecular biology, all right, and a massive time with that is about genetic evolution. And so I educationally was learning and starting to understand how evolution actually works at a genetic level. And I'm like, yeah, all right. And, so I was in this position where I was like, if the church expects me to believe in evolution, mum, I can't do it. And my mum, bless her, she went away and she found and did a load of research. And it comes back to a load of books for me to read and stuff like that. And she introduced me a couple of people to chat things over with. The church's official position by that point, actually, by the late 90s, the official position was that the church doesn't have a stand on evolution. Although it was taught in church, all right, it really, really was. Even up to relatively recently, I talked about the night I was refellowshipped. I actually sat in the corridor that night at the chapel quietly whilst they were deliberating as they deliberate and do. And there was a seminary lesson going on down the corridor, and the teacher had left the door open, and I could hear what was going on. And she was doing a lesson and teaching about evolution and how evolution was, God created the world, and could this have been designed, and those kind of things there. So
Right.
yeah,
There's workarounds.
there's workarounds, but I was able to square the circle from an evolution and a flood point of view based around the fact that not an official position. But actually, when I say nuance, it's more about the way we treat people, to be honest, Jim. It's about, so I'm at university in Scotland, okay, I'm up in Aberdeen. Student life, not many members. So if I was socialising, I was socialising with non-members. Not. I was living the word of wisdom. I wasn't doing anything I should be doing as such, but I was socialising with non-members. And I had a friend who was bisexual. Yeah, as a girl, was bisexual, and she and I would sit in the student union together. And this is probably wrong on many other levels, all right, but we would sit there checking out the girls that were in the bar at the time together. It was just quite amusing to do. I thought nothing of that. I've had friends who have been gay, who've been straight, who've been bisexual all my adult life. And never once have I looked at them, myself and Driggins, and thought, but you're doing something wrong, aren't you? You know, I have never, ever been able to see in myself that being gay or being attracted to someone of the same gender as yourself, or being trans or any of those other things that fit into that LGBT circle, if you like, I've never been able to see why there's anything wrong with it. I just haven't,
They
and now
can't
I
be
have.
sinners. They're just people that God created.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can hear myself a few years back saying things like, um, my personal opinion is this, but I accept the brethren teach something different and I support that. And trying to give cognitive dissonance to both positions at the same time. So I've always had this nuance with the way I see fairness, mostly, to be honest, towards that. I have massive challenges around the attitude of the church historically towards black members of the church,
And
my
to
black
you,
brothers and sisters,
being
you
fair
know.
is just being Christian.
Yeah, it's just being human, dude. It's
Human.
just being a decent person, you know, is respecting other people. Um, so I've always been a little bit nuanced, but as COVID comes to the end and these things are here, I sit and I'm reflecting. I'm listening to conference talks. I'm listening to what's being taught in church on Sunday. I'm going to church and trying to listen to things that are being said. All right. And what I'm going to say here is a lot of people probably find quite controversial because I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. All right. And I sat there and I realized that I could not remember the last time someone taught me the stories of Jesus, the ones that I referred to earlier, that I grew up at school from my parents, learning about Jesus and things Jesus taught. I couldn't recollect the last time, unless it happened to be New Testament year in Sunday school, all right, that we taught the stories of Jesus. And we profess to be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We profess to be following Jesus. Now, I will concede that Jesus' name is referenced in many, many conference talks. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that they're teaching Jesus. It means they're using Jesus' name as a tie-in to whatever message that person wants to give me. All right. We don't teach the basic fundamentals that Jesus taught when he was alive. And I started having concern about this. So I picked up my Bible and I started at Matthew. I went Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, and I went to study the things Jesus taught. And I went to look at it fresh and from a perspective, not of what does the church tell me these scriptures mean, but what am I actually reading here? And I learned a few things, okay? Jesus Christ's message was very, very simple. It really was. If you go beyond Acts and start to get into the writings of Paul, particularly, it gets a little bit more interesting. Okay. But if we look at the words attributed to Jesus Christ himself, love one another, you know, um, love God and love your neighbor. Be nice to people. Effectively, one of my favorite films of all time from back in the 80s. I don't know if you remember Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but there's one of my favorite lines in any movie was be excellent to each other. And that pretty much was and repent and follow me. And that was the message of Jesus. I mean, there was a bit more to it than that, but not masses, right? And that's not the things the church is teaching.
So you
So then I
referred to
started.
the scripture of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Did you
It
also
is the
find yourself?
greatest scripture of all time,
Did you,
But
did you
don't
also?
forget, if you're going to be excellent to each other, you've got to party on, dudes.
That's right, party
Yeah.
on. Did you also find yourself checking out other than King James versions?
No, funnily enough, I haven't. And it's something I will do at some point. I've grown up with the King James version. I understand it. It's the version I read. Um, Interesting thing that my wife and I are doing at the moment is we actually have got some very dear friends who are Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay, and one of the things that's become important to us is to understand what other faiths believe. Okay, so we're currently Bible studying with JWs, not for an intent to convert to their faith, and we've been very clear with them about that. Okay, but we Bible study with the JWs to try and understand their faith and where they're coming from a little better. And we've got this lovely couple that we absolutely adore, who we meet with most weeks and look at the Bible. And obviously, they have their own version of the Bible. What I have learned is I actually really like the King James. You know, is when there are other versions of the Bible presented to me. And in fairness to the Jehovah's Witnesses, who have their own translation, if you like, and we assume they're going to go to, their messaging is actually we just study the Bible. Their app has every single version of the Bible you can find in there. And they just say, study the version of the Bible you feel most comfortable with. They will direct you towards theirs ultimately, but they're happy to study from any version of the Bible. And I found actually I quite like King James, despite its old language, despite the fact it's hard to understand. It's what I've always worked with. Is the truth.
That's right. And so you're getting this new perspective. And do you come across any, let's say, podcasts or other
Oh, of
websites
course
that
I do.
that
Of course
brings
I
a
do.
different perspective to Mormonism?
I'll allow you to have three guesses to which podcast I may have found. I'll be honest and say it wasn't yours, Gene. I do apologise.
No, mine is relatively new as well, we'll say.
Yeah,
But I consume Mormon stories, and then
absolutely,
as
absolutely.
I finished 40,000 hours of John Dehlin, I started hearing. I saw on John Dehlin or somewhere, maybe Mormonism Live, Peter Bleakley.
Yeah, I know Peter. He's a really nice guy. In fact, I am. He is joining me on my podcast tomorrow night. We'll talk about that later on. Yeah, Mormon stories, very much so. I have developed, and this is going to sound very sycophantic. I've never met the guy. I've developed a real love for John Dehlin. Okay, and what he does. This Mormon Voldemort as the apologist slash Ward Radio slash Jacob Hansen community takes this Mormon Voldemort persona of someone who is conniving and nasty and trying to draw people away from the church. I discover quite quickly is just not who he is. All right. I start off listening to a lot of his faith stories of people's faith journeys and understanding that I'm not alone having questions, and that was reassuring. Then there was the series he did with Mike, I can't remember Mike's last name, the Mormon
Yeah, he
discussion
doesn't go by
stories.
any last name, just Mike.
Yeah, that's why I don't know his last name. But the Mormon discussion stories series, I absolutely burned through those. I went. My company's head office is down in Plymouth, and I occasionally have to drive. Plymouth, for context, is 330 miles from where I live. All right, it's a 5-hour drive. And in the UK, that is like the length of the country. It's a big drive, and the number of Mormon discussions episodes I've listened traveling down to the southwest of England and back again is huge. And I had some exposure to through other people I know to some of the issues that were there, enough to inoculate me, if you like, just some of the issues that are on there. But as I listen to Mormon stories and then I listen to Mormon discussions, all of a sudden two things happen. First of all, things make sense. Things I've been trying to make sense of and telling myself that just were dissonant suddenly make sense. And there is a feeling of relief as I understand these kind of things, and a feeling of sadness and disappointment as actually someone is able to spell out what kind of person Joseph Smith actually was. I'd long turned around and said, you know what, Joseph Smith wasn't perfect. He did do some wrong stuff, you know, and I love the fact that we have a prophet and the Lord will call someone who's human and imperfect. And I would have told you that to your face quite happily and defended that position. But there's a difference between an imperfect person doing God's work and some of the things that Joseph got up to,
That's right.
you
And we'll
know.
invite people to learn this year from your
Yeah,
channel more things
absolutely.
about Joseph Smith.
Come and join us. Yeah, and so I think that's the start where my journey goes, though. That, and I also read No Man Knows My History.
Okay.
Um, Vaughan Brodie's seminal work on the life of Joseph Smith, which again was a massive eye-opener. And I've read lots of other stuff since then and listened to a lot of other podcasts
And
along
we'll
the way.
say that
Obviously,
Richard
but
Bushman also wrote a book about Joseph Smith, and he is
yeah, I've
referenced.
started to read it. I've
He has
started to
referenced.
read it. Couldn't really get into it.
He's referenced Fawn
Yeah,
Brodie's work more than any other source.
absolutely. It's absolutely crazy that the faithful book that was asked to be written to counter the impact that No Man was having actually uses No Man Knows My History as its source text. But people still rag all over No Man Knows My History and use Bushman's work as a defensive argument. But you say you do understand that he's using this as his source.
That's right.
It's interesting. But yeah, it's been over the last couple of years. That's then been my journey as we've moved away from and distance from the church. And one of the things I'm blessed about, again, it's her story, not mine, so I'm not going to go into it. But my wife has been on a different but similar journey in parallel at the same time, and we've been able to do this together, which is to use Mormonish terms, it's a blessing that I've had that many other people don't, and I'm very, very grateful for.
Yeah. So about how long ago did you think that you should do a podcast?
Now that's a really, really, really interesting. So it was run up to Christmas. It wasn't long ago. I joked about to myself, don't want to do a podcast. It wasn't something I really want to do. I have a busy life, you know. But for me, there were a couple of things that came up. One was the extreme defense of the church that you see, particularly in that Twitter space post Musk. And secondly, we had I think the point that tipped it for me was when the church produced the new kids Doctrine and Covenants church history cartoon book is the best way I would describe it. You know what I mean?
As
Okay.
a reference
And then,
to the study this year of church history and to Doctrine and
yeah.
Covenants.
So obviously, as I grew up in the church, my parents used to have one of these study books. It was yay thick. It was called Book of Mormon Reader. There was a Bible, Old Testament, and New Testament, and they had cartoon type image. Cartoon by the bit is a picture with a bit of text, picture with a bit of text that told those stories. And we grew up with those in the early days to learn the Book of Mormon stories and Bible stories. Well, the church obviously has just re-released a new version of the church history / Doctrine and Covenants one. And there was a lot in the online space as that came out, and people looked at that and turned to the pages that referenced section 132 and looked at what was being taught on polygamy. And there was a lot of hype and talk about about what was being taught here and how that was the story of polygamy, and it was we can learn to do hard things because Joseph Smith did hard things by practicing polygamy. I'm like, in fairness, the church, the pushback from the ex-Mormon community to the church for a long time has been, be honest about this stuff and admit it, and they have done. Okay, so there is actually a good positive first in there, but the way they've done it and the way they're spinning that story is that, and it got rightly a lot of critique online because of that. Actually, for me, the story that was the one that drew my attention. The story that did it for me was I flipped back a few chapters, and there was the story of Jane. Her last name's gone. She was
Jane
the
Manning
black
James.
sister. Yeah, that's the one. So Jane Manning James, and one of the characters that they follow in the new reader is Jane Manning James. She was a member of the church. She was from the south. She was black. She joins the church, and some people didn't like her because she was black, but she was faithful anyway, and she endured that. And she travelled to Nauvoo, where she was taken in and lived with Joseph, and happily ever after. As an example of faith promoting around that blacks in the priesthood and those kind of issues there.
But you're thinking there needs to be
I
the
believe it.
rest of the story.
Oh, and I was just like that. because there's huge parts of the story missing, not least that she travels west, spends multiple years trying to convince Brigham that she should be able to have temple blessings, which Joseph allegedly promised her, and being told no, no, no. And eventually she's told, well, we're not necessarily your husband, but because it's you and you knew Joseph and you're such a special person, we will allow you to be sealed in the temple to Joseph as his slave or servant for perpetuity. And you're not allowed actually in the temple, so someone else will do the sealing by proxy for you. You can hang around outside. That's the Jane Manning story, all right. And the church is using this as a. And yes, it is true that despite the discrimination and despite the concerns, she did stay faithful, and we could use that as a faith promoting story. But there's just so much more to the story that's there. So I'm looking at these pieces, and I'm like, what do I do with this? And I posted, we've got a UK ex-Mormon community on Facebook, and I just said, look, guys, last year RFM started to do a Come Follow Me series on his podcast, and I found that really useful. And it stopped. I'm assuming he was busy. I'm not criticizing him. He's got so much other content, so much going on. But it stopped happening. And I said, I'm thinking about doing a podcast, just looking at the Come Follow Me and looking at what isn't being shared in the lessons that is there. All right. What do you think? I just threw it as a question. At which point, the guys from what are known affectionately as the Brit Vengers, so particularly the wonderful two over at 21st Century Saints, Jane and Sarah, Peter Bleakley, they just pounce on me and say, if you are going to do this, we will back you all the way. Yeah. And whilst I know Nemo's been busy, so I haven't even really interacted with him, I know in spirit the backing is there as well. Do you know what I mean? And I've had so much support, been embraced so much by the Brit Vengers. They're starting to tell me I'm the newest Brit Venger, although I haven't done any Brit Vengering yet. Okay. And and really from there, that was a week before Christmas, 2 weeks before Christmas. By the week between Christmas and New Year, I've recorded a pilot, if you like, a précis of what the podcast is going to do, an introduction piece, and then which was released, and then we've had 5 episodes that have gone out following the Come Follow Me manual, and it's been a ride. It's been an amazing ride. Um, I've loved doing that. It's gone, even in the 5 episodes that I've done, I've gone from pre-recording to attempting to do them live now to get a better interaction with that. This week I have my first guest on. I had and Ganesh from New Zealand. Ganesh came and joined me this week um, to look at the story of Martin Harris. What a guy, guys! If you're not familiar with Ganesh, you're looking for what's Ganesh's last name? I feel really bad now.
Chirian.
Yeah, so if you look for Ganesh Chirian on TikTok or on Facebook, if you want to understand in short, sharp bites Joseph Smith, he is your man.
That's right. And
Go and
he
look him up.
actually did a similar Sunday school thing that Radio Free Mormon did. So I called Radio Free Mormons Radio Free Come Follow Me, and I called Ganesh's Kiwi Come Follow Me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't see it back then, but I imagine the quality of it was very high. What I'm trying to do is explore the Come Follow Me curriculum, and I'm trying to do it gently. All right. I'm not looking to. I will not hold back where my position is. I'm not. I'm going to hide the fact that I am no longer seeing myself as all in with the church. Let's put it that way. But what I am trying to do is look at these things fairly. I'm looking at what the Come Follow Me manual is saying and what isn't being said by the Come Follow Me manual. And one of the things we started talking about earlier is quite fascinating is the Come Follow Me manual of 2025 is so light on actual content. I'm glad I'm not having to teach it in church on a Sunday. There's some really, really basic themes that they teach. So, for instance, the last one, if you drop on my channel, it's at Going Beyond Belief on YouTube. If you drop onto there, the last episode of Ganesh, the theme of it is essentially the 116 lost pages and Martin Harris, which would have been a massive discussion piece in Sunday school historically. It's referenced, and the learning points are you facing the right way towards the Saviour and towards the church, or are you facing the wrong way? Obviously, Martin faced the wrong way and listened to his wife rather than doing what Joseph said. And so we've got a learning point of facing the right way. We've got a learning point about, you know, Martin wanted proof that the Book of Mormon. He asked again to see the plates, and in the end, D&C 5 is Joseph is saying to effectively, no, you're not. God is saying to Joseph, he's not going to see the plates. Stop asking. If I show you the plates, no one will believe you anyway. So I'm not going to show them. So you're not showing to him, and then telling him to go and do as he's told. And obviously, we can see this as a faith promoting experience to develop. And how can we develop our own test with the Book of Mormon? And that's the lesson. That's the lesson, you know, and every lesson is like this. So it's really interesting to take the scriptures they're referencing and actually dig into it and see what actually was taught, and then critique whether the good and the bad. All right, not everything about the church is bad. All right, okay.
That's right.
And
If
to
you're going
critique
to
and understand,
if it's going to
yeah,
be the history year, teach history.
yeah, yes. And that's what it is. I'm looking at the history of it, looking at that, and I'm trying to present both sides of the coin. At no point do I want to draw a conclusion from any lesson that the church is true, that what I'm teaching this is right, or what I'm talking here is wrong. What I'm going to do is tell you what actually is there as I understand it, and with evidence to back up what I'm saying. And I'm very interested to have a conversation with my audience. I invite all my audience to join in the chat to contribute. It's why I've moved to doing this live, so that we can have a conversation. Knowing the truth behind what's going on, I want to explore how that affects someone's faith. If you are able to listen to the true story, if you like, and remain faithful, fantastic. That's what we call that. That's what we call informed consent. You know, so if you've got informed consent and you want to stay in and you're faithful, brilliant. You've got my 100% support. Tell me how you do that. Okay. And if there is a challenge to your faith, let's talk about what that is and why. You know, and how does this information affect how you're feeling about things? And that, I guess, is what we're doing. And it's going to be a year exploring that. Initially, that was the plan. I'm a busy person anyway, so to do that. I sense that within a short amount of time, there probably is going to be other content coming online as well from me. I've started to dabble with a couple of short pieces where I'm using the title did they really teach that? So if you go to my YouTube or my TikTok, you will see there's a short piece based around you know, did they really teach blood atonement? And did they really teach Adam God? What on earth was this Adam God? Did they really teach that? And what I'm hoping to do is critique some of the more controversial or less known doctrines and ask the question, did they really teach it? And then answer that question fairly. If they did, they did. If they didn't, they didn't. If they did teach something like it, and perhaps the challenge community, if you like, is twisting that slightly, I'll look at that as well. You know, but did they really teach that? I think is something we're working on, and I've got a few other ideas that I want to work with as well.
So your goal is to do your Sunday school lessons live.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
be interactive.
Yeah, so absolutely, is to do them live. Please, if you're watching this and you've not had enough Sunday school at church already, please come and join us. I'm tending to go live at 5 on a Sunday, although that will move occasionally for practical reasons. All right,
That's
but
right.
come and
Greenwich
join us.
Mean Time,
Get
right?
in the chat. Yeah. When I say live at 5, that is live GMT UK time, not Mountain Standard Time or Eastern, whatever you call them, time or whatever it might be. And I apologise if that's in the middle of the night for you. It's not my fault that the world's round, you
There
know.
you go.
But yeah, come and join us live at 5. I would love to have people come and join in the conversation there. Live at 5 for context. We're quite used to this because when we get to general conference, we watch the 10 o'clock morning session of conference live at 5 in the UK. So I can tell you, if you're in the Intermountain West, if you aren't at church and you want to listen to Come Follow Me, 10 in the morning.
I try to know when Nemo does his review of General Conference as they're going on. He is
Yes.
up until the wee hours of the morning
Oh yeah, absolutely.
finishing the
Absolutely.
day.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you Beyond Belief for coming on our show. Everybody, like and subscribe. If you can watch at, I think it'd be midnight Eastern time, maybe even. And so, but I think everybody could stay up one or two
Live at
times.
5 here. Live at 5 here is 10 a.m. in Utah. With therefore, what, you an hour behind Utah?
Oh, I'm thinking, yeah, I was thinking the other way around, right? I was doing the
Oh right, okay,
-8 versus the
okay,
+8 or whatever, right? And so,
yeah.
oh, I
So
see what you're saying. Yeah. So, yeah. So 5
if
your
if
time
I'm live
is
at
10
5, we're going to be
a.m.
first thing in
my
the morning.
time.
We'll be first thing in the morning where you are.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
All
so
right
so
then.
come and join us on Sunday morning, and I'll tell you I'll tell you what's going on with the lesson before you get to church. Brilliant.
That's right. All right. Thanks for coming on the show. Everybody like and subscribe. Check out Beyond Belief. We're going to try to get a few more subscribers his way, and so we can get the word out more. And if you have UK relatives that could stand to use some of his teachings, that'd be even better. And I do have a fan in Scotland, Mary Curry. So, Mary, I hope you enjoy this. All right. And
Yeah, I'm connected with Mary. I know
there you
you
go.
mean.
She's awesome.
Hi, Mary. How you doing?
And everybody have a great rest of the year. Bye bye.
Excellent.